Hello, and welcome to Learn Python 3 the Hard Way, exercise 23. Now this exercise is a big one, and I have a warning I want you to read that this exercise is hard. There's a lot of information, you need to go through it, but do not expect to be able to understand everything in the first or even the fifth or the 10th reading or attempt at doing this. This is one of the exercises that is a jump exercise. So you struggle with this one, you try to figure out everything you can, and then when you're done, depending on no matter how much you get through in comprehension, whether you conquer it or not, you're going to be way better when you continue on. Okay, there's two reasons that this exercise is hard. And I'm going to show you with this file. I've already downloaded this file, learn the languages.txt file, okay? I'm going to go and show you why this is hard. This file here is a list of every language that I took from Wikipedia. It's just not every language, I'm guessing, but a whole bunch of languages. And these languages are obviously written in their own language. So there's no reason to use English characters to describe a language that doesn't use English characters. So this is a good test case for displaying non-English characters on a computer. The file is encoded in UTF-8. So what that means is UTF-8 is Unicode format that uses about 8 bits and then expands. Now you don't know anything about bits or bytes yet. Exercise 23 goes all into that. Okay? But the idea with Unicode is that it's using a really huge space, like a huge dictionary, to store every character possible, plus emojis, plus extra things. They've got everything in it. And as long as everyone agrees what's in Unicode, then we can all talk to each other in all these different languages and display them everywhere. Exercise 23 goes through this languages.txt file and prints each line out doing encodings and decodings, flipping them back and forth between different character encodings and not character encodings. And it uses the Python functions to do that. Now there's nothing fancy or new in this except for two things. The first one is line 8 right here. And let me just increase this font. Oops, wrong way to do that. Let's increase the font the correct way. All right. Line 8 right there. You're going to cover this in the second half of the book, but I want you to see what that does. And this is interesting. Once you know that, you pretty much know everything to write a lot of programs. You can write a lot of software with just what you've learned to this point. We're going to cover that in a second. The other thing that is covered in this file is encoding and decoding Unicode. Now here's why this is important. I'm going to show you what happens when you try to run this program or even look at this file in PowerShell. PowerShell actually doesn't understand the concept or doesn't understand Unicode very well. You're supposed to be able to run it and have it output. So I've got UTF-8 up here and strict. And when you read the exercise, when we go through it, you'll see what that does. So on OS 10 and other computers that understand Unicode, these are not boxes. And in fact, I had to go, just so that people would believe me that the script worked, I had to go to a computer that could handle Unicode, and I had to sit there and take screenshots. So even though I output the language up there, I had to do a screenshot to sort of prove that this is what you should be seeing. You should be seeing these characters here, not square boxes. Okay, so how do you make PowerShell do output? Well, it's a little complicated. And in fact, I may research this and try to find a solution to it. But as far as I can understand, none of the solutions I've found actually work. So the first one is there's a variable called, I got it here, output encoding. And you can see my encoding is set to UTF-8 and it doesn't work. And you're supposed to be able to set that with various things. So you can do the CHCP. That right there gives you the code page for Unicode, UTF-8. But then when you run any programs with UTF-8, it actually doesn't work. So when you're going through this on Windows or a computer that doesn't get a terminal that doesn't get Unicode, because browsers understand Unicode. Let me load up this text editor. Here's Atom. Atom totally understands Unicode, no problem. Right? There. I mean, no problem with that. So that's what you should be seeing. And that's because Atom and also I believe Visual Studio Code are based on a web browser. Okay, so what's the significance of this? Python 3 decided that Unicode was going to be the most important thing that everyone should have to work with. And they made it incredibly difficult so that you would know it was important. I have to teach this to you here because you're going to run into a whole bunch of errors later on related to Unicode if you don't understand right now what errors you can run into. So that's why I devised this little exercise. It will show you why your terminal is not configured correctly or what doesn't work. Because later on you're going to run into Unicode errors because Python forces Unicode on you, even when your computer can't support Unicode. And that's the significant thing. They should have made instructions for fixing this or made it so that you could opt out of it or something, but they didn't. And they should have made it a lot easier to work with, but it's not. So you got to work with what they have. You got to deal with Python 3 and Unicode. And then just understand when you do your output, you're going to get some boxes because you're using PowerShell. Okay, so let's get into how this file is doing this. Now, you should have read the exercise, and what we're going to give you in this video is a bit of extra information. So read the exercise very thoroughly. Take lots of notes because I start from nothing. I start from nothing, and I teach you about bits, bytes, all the way up to Unicode. The significance of that is you're kind of getting an understanding of how things are stored. And that's sort of what Python 3 is forcing on you. Most programmers know these things. They grew up with these bytes and bits and all that stuff. But as a beginner, you don't. So you're going to get a crash course in that right now through Unicode. Now, how does this file work? It's only 23 lines of code. You'll notice it's actually looping through each line of that languages.txt file, but there's no looping. And you don't know looping yet, but normally a looping is going to be something like for or while. But this doesn't have any, so how is it doing it? It's got an if statement, okay? And here's the little bit of magic. See how it says main? But main is up there, right? Okay, let's walk through this in an auditing code review style, okay? Now, I start at the top, and I do the usual argv dance. No big deal. We've got our argv going. You already know that. I did it a little differently. I just do import sys, and then you can do sys.argv the same way you do readline, .readline.read on things, okay? Now, I define a function called main. Okay, I'm going to skip talking about that super quick. I'm going to jump down here. Print a line. So print line takes a line that you want to print, the UTF-8 encoding, and how to handle errors. Okay, so it takes the line and it strips it. So this is the thing you can do to strings. You take a string called .strip, and it gets rid of the white space at the end. So new lines, spaces, anything like that are cleaned off. Then what I do is I want to take this line, right, which is in UTF-8, and I want to get the raw bytes out of it, okay? Now remember, you should have read the exercise before doing this video. So you know I'm talking about bytes, bits, strings, and so on. Now, I have my language encode, nextlang encode. I use the encoding from up there. See how line 13, I've got my encoding. This is where it is. Remember, a lot of programming is being able to figure out where something comes from, okay? So if you hit here and your brain freaks out, I don't know what encoding is. Okay, well, programming is interesting because everything you need is always in the file you're looking at or other files or other projects. You just got to find it. So in this case, you go, okay, where is encoding? Ah, there it is. It's parameter. And then we see errors equals errors. So this is a way to do special settings on a function. So see, the errors equals the errors, and we're saying that errors up there is equal down here. That gets passed to that function as an extra option named errors. Okay. In the same way, it's sort of like setting an equals before you call the function. Now we have the cooked string. So we take the raw bytes and we decode it, right, into the original string. So it should match what next lang was, okay? And we use the same errors. Now this error control determines how Python explodes when it runs into something it doesn't like. And then finally, we print those two out so you can see what they look like. So let's go look at one of those lines that actually works. So see this line? Okay, there we go. That right there. So on the left are the bytes. If you remember, you should already know what \x does, but it may not really make a lot of sense. It's, it's hex as a way to talk about it. But you can get into that more later. For now, just understand that's sort of like the raw internal representation that the computer uses, and on the right is what you should be seeing. Okay, so now we know that this basically prints a line and does the encoding and decoding. And remember, from the book, you should remember that you can use the mnemonic, okay, dbez. So you decode bytes and you encode strings. So you decode bytes, you encode strings. It would really help for you to memorize that. Now let's go look at this. I have bytes, correct? Next lang is a string, correct? So that means dbez means I encode string. And when I come down here, I have bytes, right? I decode bytes, I encode string. I decode bytes, I encode string. That has been the only way I can figure out how to remember that, because honestly, the words encode and decode don't indicate from what to what, okay? They're fairly arbitrary. Why am I decoding bytes instead of encoding bytes? I mean, I'm just translating from one form to another, so why is that suddenly encode? Anyways, to just deal with that, like with a lot of things that are just arbitrarily chosen, you just memorize, and a mnemonic helps you. Decode bytes, encode strings. Remember that. Okay, so we've got a basic understanding of this print line. We can now ignore that. Just assume print line works, okay? This is how you can understand some code. Now let's pop down here. We open the languages file, right? You know that. That's not a big deal. But the big deal is we're going to force the encoding here to be UTF-8. Now this is important. We have to do that because PowerShell and many other computers default to a different encoding, and Python 3 sometimes seems to use that encoding for its defaults. I'm not sure why, because it's supposed to be all UTF-8. So once we open that, that's the only magic on that. We then run the main function. So main takes the languages file, right? Remember, it's a file, not the list of languages. It takes the input encoding that we got from up here, right, from the sysarg, which is from the command line there, UTF-8. And then how we want to handle errors is also from the sysarg, sysargv, and we used strict. All right, so we've got that so far. Now, let's see what we have. We call main, right? And main jumps up to here. Now we get into something that is new, this if. So remember when I talked about branches, right? A branch is basically a fork in the road. It's a branch, right? You have something going in a line and it can go left or right. Okay. Now if I have an if here, okay, like this, right? What that means is I go if line, okay, if line exists means that when I do language file read line, I'm going to get a line back. But if there's no line, if I'm at the end of the file, it should be none. Now, if there's a line, call print line. We know what that does. We don't have to really jump into it anymore. And then return, you know return, right? Now, here's the thing that is going to trip you up. We call main again. We call main inside main. What is that? We call main inside main. Can you do that? Okay, well, here's the thing. Remember I said you can combine, if you can do one thing, you can do it with another thing. That's just a general rule in programming. And when you can't, it's surprising. So if I can call print line inside a function, right? I could call read line inside a function. I can call any function while I'm in a function, correct? Well, that means I could call this function main inside itself. I could call it again. So what would happen? Well, how does a normal function call work? Let's look at print line. If I go to print line and I call it, okay, it jumps down to print line, it processes and runs those lines. When it gets to the end, it jumps back, correct? Jumps back to here and then moves on. Okay, so it does a jump. What main, calling main inside main does is we get to here, right? I return that value. I jump back, or I go return and call that, jump back up to main, right? Like this. Main calls itself, see? Jumps back up. So I'm here, jump back up. Are you seeing it? And then it runs again. There's another line. I read the line. I call print line. I come to main. Okay, I jump back up. I read another line. If there's a line, call print line. Jump back up to main. You see what's happening? I'm looping. So I go to main, I jump back up, go to main. Now, if we don't have this if, this will run forever and ever and ever. Well, actually, it won't run forever. There's a limitation. It would actually explode. So we can get into that in a minute. But what happened is, if line is nothing now, I get to the end of the file, this gets skipped. That's what if does. It's a branch. This is, got to take the right path. And if there's no line, got to take the left path, and then it just exits. And there you go. So what you can do now is you can do loops over things you've collected by just calling the same function over again. And as long as you have this little if statement that you'll learn in the second half of the book more extensively, you can pretty much write a lot of software, a lot of stuff you want to do. Okay. Now, that's one way to go through this, but there's another way I want you to try out. Okay, so what you want to do to really understand this is do your debug printing. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do print line. And then I'm just going to go line encoding errors. Okay. And let's do repr line. Oh. And then I'm going to do that. I'm going to do print exit print line. Okay, so let's run that. All right, so what do we got? We have, it comes in and prints the line and exit, comes in, prints the line and exit, comes in and prints the line and exit, so on and so forth, right? Okay, pretty good. Now let's watch how main works. And you know what? And in fact, yeah, we're going to do main. We're going to do this just so you can see it. But I would normally probably strip these two prints out because I already know what print line does. It's going to print something anyway, so I don't really have to care. So what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to do print. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make it look a little different. I'm going to go like that. You know what? I'm going to actually do this. I'm going to have this one only do that. Okay, and then I'm going to have this one up here do more. Okay, main, and I'm going to do repr language file, and I'm going to do encoding and errors and how to handle errors. Okay, so there we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do print. There's a line, right? Okay. And then I'm going to do over here, print exit main. Okay. And then I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do print calling main again. Okay. And actually, we're going to do this. We're going to do repr line. Okay, so what we've got is we're going to be able to see when we enter main, okay, what the line is, when we call main again, and then when we exit main, okay? So what we want to do is try to predict what the output is. So take time to figure that out, and then you run it. Okay, so once we do that, let's scroll up and see what we got. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do something a little better. Give me a second here. We don't need this whole languages.txt file. One thing when you're trying to figure out what's going on is you can just shrink down the size of your test case. So let's do this. Let's try to just get it so we can see what's going on. There we go. We don't need like a whole bunch of it. All right. So we start with the command line that we ran. Okay. Now we're at the bottom of the file. Let me side by side this real quick. All right. We're at the bottom of the file, and then we jump right up to main. That's where this first message up here is. And we see that we've got languages.txt as a file and so on. Okay. Now we go, there's a line. So we read this line, come in, this is this print statement. So we're at this point now. It says there's a line, Afrikaans. Okay, then we do print line. So now we jumped into print line down here at line 17. So we run print line. Then when it runs, it does its print. Then we exit print line. So we're out of print line. Then calling main again. Okay, right? We called main again. We jumped in here. Okay, now here's where you would get tripped up. So take a look for a second. Did exit main get printed? Right? No, it did not. We're calling main again. Do main. This gets printed. So we never reach this part, right? Okay, there's a line, print line, exit print line. There's another main. So we come down here, call main again, print line, call main again. See, it's looping. Keep on going. Call main again, call main again, call main again, call main again, and then finally we get exit main. Now, here's what I want you to do. Take this description and work with it for a while, okay? This whole exercise is meant to be something that might take you a week, and you might not fully understand everything that's going on, but there's a lot of computing and computer science in this one exercise. Take it, do what I've done here with these printouts, and try to understand how this is looping and what can happen when you do this wrong. I'm going to give you one example. Let's say I get rid of this line. Okay, I'm going to do that. Now watch. Consider this, we're switching into the breaking section now. Okay. Well, it seems to just go on forever and ever and ever, right? We never see an exit. And then finally it goes maximum recursion depth exceeded. So when we see that, that means we basically called the looping function. We called the function itself, which is called recursion in computer science, so many times that it caused an explosion. What's that explosion? Well, it's just we keep piling these variables that we're using over and over again. And because we keep doing that over and over again, eventually we just run out of memory, right? Because it needs to use memory to call each time. So that's all that's happening. So play around with that. This exercise can be very painful and it can also be very fun. And the purpose of these jump exercises is to kind of give you a really solid challenge to sink your teeth into. A lot of times you go through the book and it's pretty straightforward. You type things in, you do it, you break it, no big deal. There's not really much of a challenge to it. But this is a really good challenge, and I think you'll have fun exploring it. Okay, now, just to review, make sure that you understand, or at least memorize, decode bytes, encode strings. Make sure that you've read through, you sort of have an understanding of bytes and how characters are formed in Unicode. And if you need to, do more research of Unicode. Okay, and then as you go through this, read how I do the description there, how encodings work, how you do the breaking, okay? And then once you've understood how that recursion thing works, you can move on to the next exercise.